a challenge to dignity. Our goal was to link academics, activists, and agencies concerned with the health of refugees and asylum seekers in a spirit of collaboration and comparison, bringing together professionals working with different populations of forcibly displaced peoples, ethnic groups, and nations. The video you are watching will contain an individual presentation edited to stand alone. We hope you find them to be of value.
Dr. Hill wears many hats. She's a professor and interim assistant dean in the Herbert Wardham School of Public Health at UC San Diego. She is also the director of the UCSD SDSU General Preventive Medicine Residency, senior staff physician at San Diego Family Care, and executive director of the Asylum Seeker Health Program. And the title of her talk today is Asylum Seekers at the Southern Border, the Effects of Federal Policies on Physical and Mental Health.
Thanks so much. What a pleasure to be here. This is my first in-person conference since the pandemic. So very exciting to see you and nice to know that some of you are online. So I was given the simple task of, or did I choose this? Of talking about the effects of federal policy on physical and mental health. So just going to start, I know this group knows very well that there's been a humanitarian crisis around the world, and certainly at the border with people leaving. Oh, sure. With people leaving countries around the world. I think the Northern Triangle of Central America is a good example where there's just been such civil unrest in those three countries that people had no choice but to leave in order to find a better life for their families. One of the problems that's been going on, of course, in the Northern Triangle is that the Mayan communities and women and children have been the targets of the roving gangs that have been lawlessly controlling those countries. And many stories that we've been told are that the parents, in order to protect their children from being taken by the gangs, felt that they had no choice but to get on a very arduous journey, some of whom left with very young infants. I talked to a father who had a 6-week-old and a 2-year-old with him, and he and his wife ended up coming across Mexico and were robbed on the way, losing many of their few possessions along the way. What we also know about that particular group, and this is similar to other groups, is that they're coming with having experienced really terrible violence in their country, and violence also en route, as I described. In Médecins Sans Frontières report, half the people had reported a violent death of a relative. They had been threatened by extortion, sexual assault, torture, and then about half of them also ran into problems en route. The Northern Triangle, again, as this group knows, is just one of many countries where people are forcibly displaced, something like 80 million people, with 46 million displaced internally and 26 million refugees. So the asylum seeker is different than what Dr. Murto was talking about, which is the asylee and the refugee. But the asylum seeker is a legal definition in the United States. So people are able to get into U.S. soil and claim that they are seeking asylum and then given a legal definition to enter. So this, of course, is the San Isidro border crossing, the busiest border crossing in the world. And this is the first policy I'm going to talk about that had an effect on physical and mental health. So since 2009, ICE actually helped asylum seekers get to their destination. And most people who find the courage to come to the United States have a sponsor, and that's where they're heading. And for many years, ICE would process people, make sure that they didn't have a background record and so on, and then help them get to their sponsors. But 3 years ago in November of 2018, I suddenly stopped this service and instead began dropping people off in the community, either at a transportation station or just in the park. And at San Isidro, this is actually Texas, but it's was the same issue everywhere. So then in San Diego, we have a rapid response network, which provides services for refugees and migrants and asylum seekers, and started getting phone calls that people were being dropped off, just hundreds of people being dropped off in the community. So they quickly stood up a shelter at a Catholic church in Imperial Beach and staffed it with Jewish Family Services, took over the administration of the shelter, staffed it with staff and volunteers who would help with the travel arrangements and getting people to their sponsors as quickly as possible. And in that initial period, 2 community health centers came with mobile vans and parked them in the back, sort of for urgent issues that came up. But there was no systematic screening of people. Around that time, there were two of several deaths that were occurring in ICE detention centers and came to the attention of media. So DHS called the county and said, we're really concerned about people leaving ICE detention centers and coming in to your shelter. We don't want any more of these incidents. And the county called us. Now, the background on that is that it's a coincidence that I'm speaking after Dr. Murto, but for 12 years.
Not a coincidence.
Oh, okay. Great.
Blend.
So for 12 years, we had administered the Refugee Health Assessment Program, and we had worked closely with Dr. Murto and the county to screen the refugees who were arriving. And so the county asked us to pivot and start a program that didn't yet exist for screening asylum seekers. The purpose was, first of all, that we wanted to screen people before they entered a congregate shelter because of the obvious implications in terms of disease transmission, but also that they were going to then be sent by bus or plane to their sponsors, and we didn't want people spreading infectious disease. The other thing that happened was after we admitted people and started a screening program, then people come into the congregate shelter and they're waiting a day or 2 or 3 for their travel. And all of a sudden they kind of relax. They're out of ICE detention and they realize, actually, I've got some other health problems. So we had to also develop a kind of urgent care office hours for those individuals. If needed, we referred people to emergency and specialty care even. Sometimes we had to get case management involved. Some people needed dialysis, for example. And then we eventually were able to bring in flu vaccinations. Unlike the Refugee Health Assessment Program, where people are staying in that community, we did not have the ability to do immunizations. And I'll show you some pictures of where we were. But you have to feel that this is like being in the Peace Corps, but actually in San Diego County. The first facility we were in, we were screening people outside. The winter of 2018, 2019 was kind of cold and wet. And I had to send my husband to Costco to get lights and some canopies. He looked like a survivalist with his gear, but this was not a luxurious place to be providing care. And the second place that they sent us was the old family courthouse, where the electricity was so unstable we couldn't have a refrigerator to store vaccine. So what did we see that first round before COVID? These numbers don't seem to not reflect the angst that we went through, but we saw 241 cases of influenza-like illness, but every time we saw that, we had all the implications of the people who were exposed to this, not to mention that Texas put individuals on a plane to come to the San Diego shelter because they were overwhelmed without telling us that they had hepatitis A, which created some very interesting problems in terms of trying to control that. We actually ruled out TB in 63 people, none of whom had it. We had quite a bit of varicella. Again, the implications of varicella transmission created quite a lot of work. Lice and scabies were, in those days, we thought our biggest concern. This is pre-pandemic, so bear with me. We thought this was a big problem then. I'm really proud of the fact that very few people ended up in the emergency department, just under 1%. And that's really because of my team's around-the-clock work. We saw many other conditions, pregnancy complications, even women in labor, lots of skin conditions, including leishmaniasis, and injuries from people who chose to come in instead of coming in through the port of entry, may have taken a less traditional route for crossing the border and then became injured. We had somebody break their back falling off the wall or getting stuck on barbed wire and so on. So this is just some pictures. This was our first site. I love that somebody's hula hooping out there in the lawn of our first shelter. And we put up signs so people often had no idea how far it was from San Diego to New York and how long it was going to take them to get there. This is upper left, our congregate sleeping area. The upper right is a picture of the old family courthouse, which has since been torn down. And then here's one of JFS staff, lower left, talking to somebody about how to get them to their sponsor, and the playroom is the last picture. So by the end of March 2022, of course, things practically shut down. And the only people that we were seeing in that interim period were humanitarian releases, some were still being allowed across the border. But after the inauguration and the opening of the border again to asylum seekers with some controls, we were able to restart the program end of February, beginning of March of this year. And this again was a screen and stabilize program before people went to their sponsors, with the addition that we had to screen everybody for COVID. So we used a self-swab in one of our shelters and sent those to the county for a very rapid PCR. We're getting those results back in 6 to 12 hours. And at our other shelter in San Diego, there's an on-site company that's doing rapid testing followed by PCRs for those that are symptomatic or positive. So in our current model, because this is COVID, we could no longer put people in a congregate setting. And so what we've done is we've taken over 2 hotels in San Diego County, similar to what the county's done for the COVID positive homeless population. And that has worked very well because we're able to keep families together in a hotel room and not have to worry about the transmission of COVID and other diseases. We've again coordinated very closely with the county and the state on protocols. So our current volume is been fluctuating quite a bit, and I'll talk in a minute about the federal policies that are influencing that fluctuation. But let's just say somewhere around 150 arrivals at each of the shelters 7 days a week, and multiple languages. We're also seeing a lot of Russians. We're also seeing Romanians. We have Brazilians, Middle Eastern, and African asylum seekers as well. But the Russians have been sort of the surprisingly large number of asylum seekers most recently. So what have we been seeing since round 2? Well, we've seen a lot of COVID, and the numbers really vary from week to week. Initially, from April till we kind of had a lull in the summer, meaning that we went down to say 5%. Initially, we were seeing up to sometimes 15 to 20% of arrivals were COVID positive. And then this seemed to go down, but again, lately the numbers have gone up again. And I think this is kind of a combination of whether people are having to wait to cross together in a group setting and then transmitting COVID between them, or whether they're being held in ICE detention together and transmitting in that setting. If people are crossing very quickly and getting through, or perhaps have been vaccinated, then the numbers are lower. We're also seeing a lot of behavioral health problems, as we saw the first round, anxiety, depression, and some suicidal ideation. And I'll talk in a minute about what some of the policies have been that have influenced and driven that, besides just being an asylum seeker. And I would say, in terms of behavioral health problems, the concern about their legal status and what's going to happen at their asylum hearing is probably the biggest source of anxiety in this group. A lot of chronic disease as well, diabetes and hypertension, ongoing issues with pregnancy. If people are early in their pregnancy, we assess them for stability. We're actually uber careful about referring people who have even mild elevations in their blood pressure before we get them on a bus or plane, to not knowing where they're going to get health care when they arrive. I think one of the things that has helped us to provide really consistent, safe care for this population has been the development of really strict protocols. This is not, the shelter is not the place for the art of medicine. This is a place for, let's just do everything the same way somebody comes in. We're gonna really follow the rules. And so just to give you an example, if somebody comes in with varicella, for example, we have to consider, have they exposed anybody either in detention or on the bus, or in their group who could be pregnant? That person then needs to go to the hospital and quickly get assessed for varicella immunity and given passive immunity, so to protect the baby, and everybody else needs to be varicella immunized. So trying to work closely with the county on how to make all of those things happen in a very timely way before people travel is a challenge. I want to say a quick word about mental health challenges. So again, most of my asylum seekers, unlike the refugees that I took care of for 12 years, asylum seekers are not staying in San Diego. More than 90% of them are leaving California, let alone staying in San Diego. And they're only spending maybe 1, 2, or 3 days with us. So we've had to consider very carefully, how do you ask those questions in a setting where you really can't do anything about it? We've done a lot of work in that regard, and it's really individual. I think you have to look at what's best for the guests. Where are they going? Where's their support? So I'll just give you a quick example. I had a woman with a postpartum psychosis. It happened to be, of course, Christmas Day. And her husband was not coping with taking care of the newborn and the 2-year-old. And it turned out that she had a mother in Florida. And this has happened before. And so, in my practice, I've been practicing in a community health center for 40 years. In my practice, if I had a woman with postpartum psychosis, my first thought is, well, where can I put them on a plane to get them somewhere else? But in this case, sorry.
2 minutes.
2 minutes. Whoa. Okay. That didn't happen. Okay. So I am going to go to, this is our vaccine information. So we at first thought we were having a lot of vaccine refusals, but it turned out that people were being vaccinated in Mexico, which we thought was very exciting. And that most of the refusals actually made a lot of sense to us. Like, we don't want to get on a plane and have to say we don't have a fever and chills and aches. So a word about federal policies. So as you know, our previous administration had a wait in Mexico policy, otherwise really inaptly named Migrant Protection Program, which had just terrible consequences for the asylum seekers, forcing them into some very dangerous situations with, murder, extortion, kidnapping, and so on. I think the most egregious of the policies was the separation of parents and children. And as you know, that has not been solved. There are still, the last administration did this without making provisions to be able to reunite these children with their parents. Detention in adverse conditions. My colleagues and my lawyer friends, the American Academy of Pediatrics, who had the opportunity to go into detention centers during the last administration, was just shocked by what they had seen. And here's just some pictures. And lastly, asylum hearings being held in tent with no lawyers, limited access to witnesses, and so on. The Biden administration is trying to change those policies. As you know, they reversed MPP. They took MPP away. And what happened? Texas challenged them. It went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has reinstated MPP. It's just so incredibly disheartening. The Biden administration is looking to reverse Title 42, which was also started by the last administration to keep asylum seekers out, and that's on hold. I'd like to end by saying that there are many federal policies that have a very bad effect on the physical and mental health of the general population. And I don't think we have to look very far to find these policies. And I think the headlines say it all. And from more recently, voter suppression to the just severe blow to reproductive rights that's going on right now. So in conclusion, public health is team science. And there are many agencies that I work with that make the work that we're doing with Jewish Family Services and Catholic Charities, the county and the state possible. And I'm very grateful to their help.
Thank you. Let's open it up for questions for Dr. Hill.
I'd like to go back to just where you were when we had to hurry you along. You were talking about an instance of postpartum psychosis. If you could say a little bit more about that and about the mental health issues and how you're dealing with it, because I remember in particular, of all the list of protocols that the clinic had, the one that was perhaps the most frustrating is how do we deal with the mental health issues?
Yeah.
And getting that in place. So
yeah,
I'd like to loop back to that a bit.
So I'd say, first of all, that the acute and very serious mental health issues are infrequent, but very consuming. And so the example of the woman with postpartum psychosis who would normally we would have medicated with antipsychotics and then gotten her into care and sort of gotten her stabilized, ending up deciding that the best place for her was with her mother in Florida, where she could get into a situation and the kids could be safe. We ended up in terms of the details in putting her on benzodiazepines in consultation with psychiatry to get her through the flight, and then having them get her into care in Florida. So sometimes you make unusual decisions. We've made other decisions with women who are late-term pregnancy, and UCSDOB is going, on a plane? But we're like, you know what? The shelter's no place to be by yourself with a newborn. And, this was a shared decision-making that we do. Other instances of suicidal ideation or psychosis, again, kind of bringing in local mental health and getting people stabilized. We had one young woman who had been kidnapped and has such a horrific story, I can't talk about it. She was fortunately hospitalized for 3 weeks and received some really good care and was stabilized and was able to rejoin her family and then get in with her sponsors and get into long-term care. So those very acute, high, serious problems are rare. More commonly, what we're seeing is, first of all, the PTSD from the experiences that people have before they arrive, but then a lot of anxiety. With the former administration, most of that anxiety was because of all the news and the negative attitudes towards asylum seekers that were coming out of the administration, making people very anxious that when they got to their asylum hearing, rightly so, that they wouldn't get their day in court and that they would not get asylum.
Okay, thank you. Are there other questions? Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm really curious about this group from Texas to here with TB. And can you say more about it?
Influenza, yeah.
Like what happened? Like what was it?
This is still happening. That the Texas system. I would say that one of the good policies of the state since March the 1st has been that they have supported these hotel-based shelters that are providing a safe place for asylum seekers to be housed and screened and sent to their sponsors. Not all of the states are in a situation where they're able to set up that kind of infrastructure and have access to medical care for both screening and for the acute things that arise while you're waiting to travel. Texas being one of those states. So they still send people, as Arizona does. They are still sending asylum seekers to San Diego for screening and so on. In this case, which was June of 2019, they started sending 500 people a week by plane from Texas to San Diego, and the asylum seekers had hepatitis A. So we had to implement both chemoprophylaxis, where you take Tamiflu because you've been exposed to the flu, and then therapeutic agents, which is Tamiflu at twice the dose for the people who had influenza. And we worked closely with the county and actually were successful in preventing any community transmission of influenza A, which was amazing.
Okay, I think we have one question coming in from Dr. Yetsa Bokoris.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, and hello, Linda. I'm glad to see you.
Hi.
Yeah, I was curious about the information on the percentage of vaccination that you found, over 50%, because we are doing a survey right now at the Guatemala-Mexico border, and we're finding a similar percentage of vaccination. So I think it's quite high. And I was interested in this observation you made that it might be because they are being vaccinated in Mexico. Do you have a sense of where in Mexico, in which type of, is it by migration authorities in Mexico or in the shelters, or how is this working?
It's so nice to see you. It's in the shelters that people are getting vaccinated. The other thing I was going to show you is that there's quite a bit of variation in terms of vaccine uptake by where people are coming from. And we have found that depending on the country of origin, the uptake, both in terms of where they got vaccine, if they got it before, with individuals, for example, from Central America, more likely to have been vaccinated in the camps, but the Russians perhaps having been vaccinated before they left Russia. So yes, it's interesting that the rates you're seeing are similar.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there other questions?
Do we know which vaccine they're getting?
Yes, and I don't know if that's in here. No, I don't think I included it. But 90% of the vaccines that have been given given to the asylum seekers are FDA approved. So that's super helpful. If otherwise, we offer them another vaccine if it wasn't FDA approved. And we have both J&J and Pfizer on site, so we're able to immunize the children as well.
Do we know which vaccine they're getting if they're getting it in Mexico?
I don't know for sure.
Maybe Yetza knows that.
Well, it could be Pfizer, AstraZeneca. That's the more likely, if they are FDA approved. Because we also have CanSino and Sinovac, but those aren't approved.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure.